So stop. Do not add volume to your training sessions by way of adding sets. I know it seems easy. I know it seems simple. I know it seems so attractive and appealing to do this, but man, there are better ways to do this, right? We need to ramp up that load. We need to check ourselves on our reps before we wreck ourselves on those reps. And so when it comes to high volume training, adding sets, it seems like the low-hanging fruit, but you should not do it. And here are a couple of reasons why, along with a 180-degree surprise attack at the very end. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Alright, so let's talk about some high volume training, right? We could be talking about high volume chest workouts, high volume back workouts, high volume shoulder workouts, high volume arms workouts, right? Pump chasers. Hashtag pump chasers. Sorry about that. In any event, no matter how you want to talk about this, I think we can all agree that volume's pretty high on the list, right? When it comes to the things that are actually going to be effective, when it comes to the things that are actually going to unlock everything that we ever wanted to unlock, on those rubber mats, I think we can all agree that volume is either the key or one of the keys. I mean, intensity's up there. Time under tension is up there. Right? There's a number of things that are up there, right? Volume is not alone on the mountaintop, but it's pretty high on the list. And so when we're thinking about volume, when we're thinking about how to adjust our training, when we're thinking about how to add volume potentially, right? We want to be very, very, let's say, strategic with how we do this, because it is so important, because it can be, so valuable. I mean, we even talked about this back in episode 149, it looks like it is, and I will link to that down in the show notes. We talked about adjusting volume for the long term, right? For long-term hypertrophy, how should you adjust your volume? Well, what I want to do here today is I kind of want to piggyback off of that discussion and go a little bit deeper. When it comes to high volume training, let's actually, before I get into what you shouldn't do, let's make sure we lay down the foundation. Let's make sure we all understand what we're talking about here. Volume can basically be added to, or it can basically be improved or increased one of three different ways, right? You can add load, heavier weights. You can add reps, more reps per set, or you can add sets to your training session. Any one of the three, assuming you hold everything else constant, right? Which we never do, but assuming that you do, you're going to add some volume, right? You're going to increase your work capacity and your workload over time. What I want us all to consider very strongly here is not to add sets to your training sessions as your, let's say, primary method of adding volume, right? For those of you that want to engage in high volume training, for those of you that are interested in high volume training, I strongly encourage it. I think it's an extremely effective protocol. I would still encourage you to exercise some caution when it comes to adding sets to your training sessions as a way of achieving that high volume. Adding sets has a time, it has a place. We're going to talk about that at the tail end of the podcast here. But on entry, right, as a ticket to the dance, I would not encourage you to think about adding sets right out of the gates, and hopefully I can make a reasonably compelling case as to why. Adding sets, though, it's the surest, it's the clearest, it's the easiest way to add volume, to give your volume, to give that work capacity a boost in the arm. A shot in the arm might be a better way to say it. At least that's how regular people say it. Nobody says boost in the arm, but we just did. If you want to add sets to your session, it's going to help you, right? It's going to help to do that. Shot, boost, however you want to look at it. But I would encourage you not to do that. And we're going to talk about, a couple of reasons why I think that you should save that for the end. And so let's dig into it. All right, so while adding sets is the easiest way to add volume to your training session, we are going to make the case. I am going to posit here this morning, this afternoon, this evening, this night, this middle of the night, whenever you happen to be listening to this. If I have any 3 a.m. listeners, man, that you guys are amazing. it should be the last. It should be the last way that you consider adding volume. I would encourage you to consider adding volume through your load or through your number of reps first. And let me give you 2 reasons why, and then we have a little surprise attack waiting for you guys at the end of today's episode. So number 1, here's what you need to do. And I've had to do it many times myself. I still challenge myself to do it at least once or twice, every couple of blocks. Every calendar quarter, I challenge myself to do this at least once, if not twice. You need to do an honest audit of your training intensity. And here's what I mean by this. You need to look at your logbook, whether you're doing pen and paper, whether you're using, a Google spreadsheet, it doesn't matter, whatever you're using. You need to do an honest audit of your RPEs. And you need to look at the logbook and you need to ask yourself, all right, am I really hitting a 7 RPE? Like, are my 7s, are they a true 7? Or are they actually a 4? Are they actually a 3? Right? Are they maybe more like a 5 or a 5.5? Right? You need to just be real with yourself, and you need to say, all right, man, like, where am I at in reality with my intensity? Are my 8 RPEs really only 2 reps shy of failure? Or could I really get 3, 4, or 5? Like, where am I at on the spectrum here? Right? Because it's very easy to kind of, just over time, you slip into a comfort zone, right? You slip into just kind of going through the motions a little bit. Even if your intensity level is generally speaking fairly high because you're experienced, you're seasoned, or whatever the case may be, it's very easy to just kind of, fall into a rhythm where you just get kind of stuck. You're kind of in a little bit of a training rut. And you're like, nah, that was an RPE of 7. Right? And really, it's just like, you're not feeling that great, or you didn't sleep that well, or you don't have enough calories, or you have too many calories, or whatever the case may be. It's like, no, that's probably not a real RPE of 7 for you. Maybe it's really actually a 5 or a 5.5, and you need to pony up a little bit to get to that RPE of 7. If you can handle a higher load, even if only slightly, right, then what that's going to do, like, for example, let me give you guys a concrete example. Let's say you're squatting 225 for sets of 6, and that's an RP of 7 for you. At least that's what you're putting down in your logbook. If you actually did an audit of yourself, and I'm gonna tell you guys exactly how to do that here in a second, or at least I'm gonna link you to a resource that's going to help you do that. That is also provided by me, so it's kind of circular in that way. If you're doing squats, you're doing 225 for sets of 6, and you have it down as an RPE of 7. What if you could actually do 225 for sets of 7? Right? Actually, no. What if you could actually do 235 for sets of 6? Let's leave the reps the same for right now. If you could actually do 235 for a set of 6, and that's really an RPE of 7, imagine what would happen if that became your new baseline for RPE 7 on the barbell squat for the next 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, right? If you did nothing else, right? If all you did for your barbell squats was just change, a 225 at 6 RPE 7. You actually go in there, you do a little testing. You're like, nah, I kind of think it's 235. You do 235 for a set or 2 or 3 or a couple of weeks or whatever, and you conclude, yeah, that's actually a true RPE of 7. I can't tell you how many times I've put in my book RPE 7, and then later on that workout or the next week or whatever, I actually put true RPE of 7, and it's 5 or 10 or 15 pounds heavier. That's going to have an unbelievable compounding effect for you over time, right? That's 10 pounds of additional load on your fibers, on your musculature, right? On the thing and things that you are trying to improve upon by your very being in the gym, right? That's 10 additional pounds every single rep. And you do 3, 4, 5 sets every single session that you squat. And you squat once or twice or thrice per week if you're just way, way up there, right? That's an incredible impact over time. And so it's a tiny, tiny micro change in the here and now. But you extrapolate that thing forward over, several cycles, and you are going to be in really good shape. Now, let's be really clear. This is not a command. This isn't even a suggestion, to just start bombing and blasting without paying any attention to what's going on. To just going into the gym, say, yeah, Jim told me to get in here and just get it done, right? Jim and Jocko Willink both told me to get in here and get after it. So that's what I'm going to do. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you need to do an honest audit of where you're at. And if you get in there and you just bomb and you just blast and you pay no mind to where you're at, then you know what's going to happen? Especially if you're pushing 40 like I am, especially if you've got these old man joints, you're getting injured. 100%. You're getting hurt. And then what's going to happen? RPE 0. RPE -2. Right? That's what you're going to be working with for a while. So that is not the recipe here. That's not the suggestion at all. But it is just, hey, use your experience. Right? Use your experience. And if you're just a total beginner, like you're just starting out from nothing, then my best advice to you would be to just proceed very, very, very slowly. Don't worry about hitting RPEs of 6, 7, 8, 8.5, 9 right now. RPEs of 3 are going to elicit a training effect for you because your body's not used to it. So I wouldn't worry about it so much. But how do you figure out if your RPEs are true to form? Well, as I alluded to a couple of minutes ago, I did a weekly shred a few weeks, maybe a month ago now. The weekly shred is my live show on Thursday nights that is on YouTube live every Thursday night. So you guys can always check that out right here on YouTube. But this was maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. We talked about how to figure out if you're training hard enough. And the recipe, the protocol that I suggested was using a combination of AMRAPs and RPEs to figure out what your true RPE is. So I'll link to that down in the show notes. It might be worthwhile. I'll work through a couple examples exactly how to do it, using sets to failure to figure out what your actual RPE is. So you guys can check that out if you're looking for, if you're like, yeah, Jim, this sounds good. I need an audit. Like I need to know where I'm at. Well, check that out. It might be a worthwhile investment. Listen to it, on the car ride into work. Not that anybody commutes to work anymore, but, in the time that you would normally be commuting to work, listen to it, pop it on in the den or, the office or the bathroom or whatever the case may be. So some of you might be thinking, all right, Jim, this is pretty interesting, man. But if I got to be honest with you, man, my RPEs are pretty on point, right? They're pretty solid. Like I'm not super concerned about my RPEs being off the mark. So what might you suggest for me, bruh? Like what should I do? Well, what I would encourage you to do is I would look to the second variable in the volume equation. So we're still not adding sets yet. What I would encourage you to do is see if you can't sneak in a couple extra reps here and there. And here's what I mean by this. I'm not talking about big compound lifts, at least not the big 3. I'm not talking about your bench, your squat, your deadlift, especially if you are working in like the 2 to 6 or 7 rep range for your really heavy work, right? Nobody's sneaking in an extra rep on a triple, right? Like that doesn't get snuck in anywhere. Like it's coming, you're prepared for it, and hopefully you get it. Like that's where you're at when you're working in, the 2, 3, 4, 5 range. But when you start to look to your other hypertrophy work, let's say, right? Like you start to look at anything else. I mean, it could be barbell, it could be a barbell row, it could be a hack squat, it could be a dumbbell press, it could be a curl, obviously, it could be a press, it could be anything, right? When you're working in the 6 to 12 rep range, then all of a sudden it's like, I'm doing sets of 6, right? Those could maybe be sets of 7. I'm doing sets of 9, right? Those could maybe be sets of 10. Or, heaven forbid, I'm doing sets of 10. Those could be sets of 11. If you can handle, the lack of feng shui-ness of having, sets of 11 in your logbook, because that's a little janky, let's be honest. But you can probably find some extra reps here and there. You can probably find on some of your isolation work, on some of your accessory work, on some of your other work outside of, SBD, you can find some extra reps. I guarantee you can. So again, if you're honest with yourself, I bet you can find some volume right there. And again, we haven't added a single set to our sessions. We haven't added a single set to what we're trying to accomplish in the gym. And yet, we've done an audit on our intensity, so our loads maybe have gone up a little bit, or we've done an audit on our reps per set. So now all of a sudden, Our sets of 7 have become sets of 8. Our sets of 9 have become sets of 10. And, our sets of 12 have become sets of 14, and so on and so forth. And so these are really, really effective ways to actually get in some high volume training and maybe even find, that optimal training volume for hypertrophy. And we haven't added a single set to our session. All right, but another reason why you might not want to add sets to your training session, this is actually a lot more practical, right? This is even more practical than adding load, adding reps to your set, or whatever the case may be. It's very simple. It's time, right? Adding sets to your session takes time. It takes time to do the set. It takes time to rest before the set, right? And you should be resting pretty long between your sets, as we talked about way back in episode 29. So this was like 2.5 years ago when the podcast had just started. And so I'm doing episodes in my car. The audio is god-awful. You can barely hear anything I'm saying, but I'm still just trying to get it out there. So I'll link to that down in the show notes too if you want to listen to a slow-motion train wreck happen right before your ears. Give that thing a look. But the short answer, the short conclusion in that episode was just you need to be resting a long time between sets. At least 2 minutes, more like 2.5 or 3 for most of your sets. So if you're doing that, right, now all of a sudden if I'm adding a set or multiple sets to my session, I'm adding a lot of extra time, right? Time to do the work, time to rest between the work, and potentially if you start adding, brand new movements to the mix. So not only are you just adding a set or tacking on a 4th set to your squats or a 3rd set to your cable kickbacks or whatever, right? You're adding in a whole new movement. Now all of a sudden you got a setup, you got a breakdown, you might have a warm-up set in there just to calibrate yourself to the movement, and then you just have a whole host of time that you need to allocate to that movement. And so just from a simple practicality standpoint, adding sets to your session just doesn't make a ton of sense because, at a certain point, there's just no time left, right? At a certain point, we all have lives outside the gym, as sad as it might be. We all have, we have jobs, we have kids, we have wives, we have husbands, we have other people and things in this world that would like to spend some time with us that aren't the squat rack, right? That aren't our boo, the hack squat machine. And so we need to be aware of this, right? We need to just be at least cognizant of these additional demands on our time. And so we might not be able to allocate more time to our training. In fact, you might be, in a situation where you're already pressed for your training. You might be in a situation where you're squeezing it in already. And so you're like, man, I love training. I love this whole bodybuilding thing, whether it be competitively or recreationally. I take my physique very seriously. But man, I can only train, from 4 to 5:30 p.m. after work at night. I can only train in the morning from 6 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. before I get rolling. I'm trying to squeeze in my sessions during my lunch break. That is an hour or 75 minutes or whatever the case may be. So you're like, man, I can't. I literally can't add any more time to my sessions. So you very well may be in that situation. Or you might even be in a situation or in a circumstance where you have a fairly flexible schedule, right? You have more flexibility in your life, but heaven forbid, you actually enjoy other things outside of training. Guess what? That's okay. And it is allowed. And so you may not want to add any more time to your training schedule. As much as you love squats and deadlifts and dumbbell deadlifts and trap bar deadlifts and all these, rack pulls, as much as you love all things deadlifts, you may just want to say, hey, I want to do some other things in my life. Right? I want to spend time with my kids. I want to, devote more to my career. I want to spend some more time with my wife or my husband. You know what? That's okay. And believe it or not, it is allowed. And so, just from a purely hours in the day standpoint, time in the gym, adding sets may not be the answer, right? It may not be the solution to what you're looking for and what you're trying to do, if you are indeed trying to engage in some high volume training. Okay, so there is a fairly compelling, or at least I hope somewhat compelling case for not adding sets to your training session. But here's what I'm going to do. Here's my surprise attack for the next 3-4 minutes. Just for completeness purposes, it is worth mentioning that for some of us, adding volume by way of sets is going to make a whole lot of sense, especially if you're rocking those old man joints like I am. So here's one thing I've learned about myself fairly recently, just in the last couple of years. I don't do super well going up to 8-9 RPEs too regularly. I don't do terrific when I'm getting really close to failure. I kind of like to live in that 6 to 7 to 7.5 range when it comes to RPEs. If I push the envelope a little bit too much, I just feel constantly banged up, man. I feel constantly banged up. I feel super stiff. My joints just feel like porcelain, and it just takes me a really long time to get back into the groove. But if I kind of hang in that 6 to 7.5 and 8 once in a while, if I kind of hang in that rhythm, man, I feel like I'm a workhorse. Like even at 39, I'll be 40 in just a few months here, well, May of next year. I feel good, man. I feel really good. Now, this was different when I was in my early 30s and mid 30s. 20s don't even count. 20s, you're invincible. You can basically do whatever you want, whenever you want to. So I'm not even going to address that. But in my early to mid 30s, I felt like I could go, to 8, 9, 9.5 RPE repeatedly and feel really, really good. And maybe because I did that, I'm in the situation I'm in now. That's very possible. But that is how I felt, and that's just kind of the story that I myself have lived in. So maybe you're in a similar situation, right? Maybe you're in a similar situation, especially if you are a little older like I am. I mean, some of you are probably older than I am, definitely are older than I am, and some of you are younger than I am. And so, we're on both sides of the spectrum here. But if you find that your joints can't really handle a ton of volume through load, then it might be worthwhile for you to consider adding sets, sticking around that 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5 RPE range. Here is the danger, though. Here's the tricky part that you have to be very, very aware of. And I referenced this a couple of minutes ago, but I'll bring it up here again. It is critically important that you audit yourself using that AMRAP RPE formula that I laid out in the weekly shred that's linked down in the show notes here. Check that out, because what you're going to need to do, you've got to make sure that your RPEs of 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, that they're true to form. Because if they're not, right, then you're just not getting as much out of your training. You're just not getting as much out of your training as you think you are, right? If your 6s are actually 4s or 4.5s, you're just, it's not useless, of course, but I mean, I'm speaking to those of us that want to really get the most out of ourselves. We want to, push ourselves to reach our potential. We want to glean as much as we possibly can out of these gym sessions. And so we want our reps to be as effective as possible. And so unless you're close enough to failure, which as long as you're 4 reps away, you're fine. When you start getting 5, 6, 7 reps away, the sets really lose their effectiveness. And so if you are going to kind of ride it on the lower end of the spectrum, 6 RPE, 7 RPE, kind of like where I like to live, then you just have to be aware that if you're too far off with your intensity gauge, you're not going to reap the benefits of your training like you think you might be. But still, you may not want to take your loads up to 8, 8.5, 9, 9.5 RPEs. I can respect that, and I actually don't do that myself. And so here is definitely something that you should consider. All right, guys, that is it for this podcast. Whether you watched the video version or the audio version, I really appreciate you guys, man. I appreciate you guys so much. I hope you got a little bit out of this, and it will help to have a positive impact on your training. If you want to bounce on down to the description, check out those links that I mentioned in the episode to the previous podcast, to the weekly shred from 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. That would be terrific. I think that those will help you out as well. You can also scoop up some free stuff. You can grab, the fat loss formula. You can grab the cardio plan. You can check out, other YouTube videos, other podcast episodes. And then, of course, you can check out Full Throttle Fat Loss, right? I have Full Throttle Fat Loss, which is my full digital course that helps to support the podcast here and the YouTube channel and all the other things that I'm doing here with F-Cube. So if you're serious about fat loss and you want to go all in on taking a very professional approach to physique development, then give that a look, and I would be very, very honored and humbled if I saw you in the course. But either way, you guys are the best, and I will see you guys next time.